When is continuing education a good idea? And when are you just throwing your money at the wall for no good reason at all? What's up, Active Lifers? Welcome back to the Active Life Podcast. I'm Dr. Sean Pastuch. I'm your host. Today, I'm joined by Active Life staff member, Dr. Kalin Ashby. He just finished building out our Return to Sport specialty for graduates of our ALP curriculum. We go over what goes into building out a specialty course. We go into why some people need to be able to go through this education and some people don't need to take it. We go through exactly who does need this kind of education and who doesn't. We talk about how many people collaborated with Kalin to build this out so that you can start thinking about when you're building things out in your business. Are you giving it enough attention? Are you thinking it through well enough to determine that it's actually done? Remember, when you listen to this podcast and you find it immensely valuable, your toll is to share it with a friend. That's the toll. Share it with a friend who will also find it valuable. If you're on the fence about enrolling in ALP with us and you're curious, you have questions about it, listen to this podcast and head to the bottom and schedule a call to speak to somebody on our team about what it's all about. There's absolutely no pressure. You will not be asked to enroll on that call. It's simply discovery so that we can identify, do we think that you're a good fit? And do you think that we're a good fit? And then we take it from there. Let's get to Dr. Kalin Ashby. Kalin Ashby, welcome to the Active Life Podcast. Dr. Kalin Ashby. Don't let me mess that up.
Yeah, formalities are important.
Well,
thanks, Sean.
You know what? Formalities sometimes are important, especially when our egos are involved. I have a question for you about that. When you go to a wedding, and somebody writes on the table placement or in the invitation, Mr. and Mrs. Kalin Ashby. Does that do anything for you?
No.
When I
do I think doctor needs to be attached to that? Is that what you're asking me?
I always mess with my friends when they do that.
Really?
I'm like, oh, hey, I know that you think I'm a fake doctor because I just got a chiropractic degree and I don't practice anymore. And technically my license has lapsed. So I'm just a doctorate in terms of my credits, but you put that fucking doctor in front of my name, okay?
I feel the opposite, honestly. Like, I feel so much resistance, and I think maybe that's just from being exposed to people who, like, are that way, where it, like, kind of rubbed me the wrong way, that I just, like, was so uncomfortable. Like, oh my gosh, like, that's what you're asking me to, I have to address you that way? Like,
you know what? So. You know what's interesting about that? Because obviously when I'm doing that, I'm doing it tongue in cheek and I'm messing with my friends because it's fun.
Obviously.
But I had a guy not long ago whose name I don't remember, which by the way makes me so happy, who sent he trashed me in the comment section on somebody else's post. And it was a post where my friend Pat Barber was debating the merits of an argument that I was making online that Pat, I love you, didn't understand. And so he misrepresented, like he built a house out of straw and then lit it on fire and was like, that's Sean's house, dude. Like, would you want to live in it? I'm like, I never built that house. But anyway, that's a reference to straw men for people who don't know what that means. It means he built a fake argument that he didn't mean to build, but that he thought was real and wasn't, and then debated against it it didn't do what it was meant to do. Anyway, this guy wrote a thing in the comment section where he had done research about me. He's like, of course you would think this. You're a fake doctor. At first I thought like, oh, he's a doctor and let me pay attention to him. But it turns out you're just a chiropractor. And so you should get doctor out of your Instagram handle. And I was like, that's an interesting way to respond in the comment section. I wonder what this person's sad about. So then I go and look at their bio before I respond. And in his bio, lo and behold, it says so-and-so MD. And I was like, oh, do as I say, not as I do. That's interesting. And then I was like, what kind of a doctor? So I was bored. I'm sitting on the couch watching some Netflix. Optometrist. I'm like, MD, motherfucker, you're an eye doctor. Why don't you just tell people I'm an eye doctor so that when you give your impression of orthopedic issues, we all know that you have no idea what you're talking about.
Right.
Because you wouldn't. And then I said, and this is where I actually think there is some merit to decorum. I said, the reason why I keep the doctor in front of my name, this is the only response I gave him. So the reason I keep the doctor in front of my name is because there are rooms that I cannot get into because there are snooty people who decide who gets to come in and who doesn't. And they make a split decision based on whether you have those two letters in front of your name. And once I'm in the room, I have the ability to say a smart thing or ask a smart question that makes people want to have me in the room. And once they want to have me in the room, I have influence in the conversation. And I don't get in that room at all. I don't get to add that value at all if I don't put doctor in front of my name, because people like you wouldn't let me in the room. So people on this thread who are coaches should take note. If you would treat me that way because my doctorate degree isn't up to the standards of what you believe has merit, how would you treat them? How do you think of them? And that's when I do believe having doctor in front of your name carries value.
Yeah, it's the ticket to the room, right? It's just like it allows you in versus like, that makes sense.
Yeah. So Kalin, when I was last year, July 4th weekend, I was trying to carry my daughter on my shoulders, and I was experiencing such bad neck pain from a disc injury that I decided to tell her, no, I don't want to carry you on my shoulders. And I lied to her about why. I just don't feel like it right now. Of course I felt like it, but I said no because I was in too much pain. The pain made me a liar. I hired you to help me get out of that pain so I would never have a problem saying yes to my kids on my shoulders again. Now I put them up there whenever I can. And so thank you for that.
I would give credit where credit's due, right? Like, you executed on the things. Like, you earned the right to be able to do those things.
That's true.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's true. And I appreciate that. And now I was talking in a staff meeting today about I might need your help again because I play softball now and I feel like I get one really good throw. And I'm used to being the guy who, like, I do two things better than anybody else on the field. I run faster and I throw harder. And so when I play the outfield, I'm like, my mental game is I want you to think you can run on me, and then I'm going to throw the ball and you're going to get out. And you're like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And I don't have that.
I relate to that.
Yeah. I don't have it anymore. I want it.
Yeah, we'll get it back.
I want it back. But so the reason I thought that was a valuable thing to bring up is you just designed the return to sport course for ALPs in active life, yes?
Yes.
Okay. I think people misunderstand oftentimes what the reason to need specialized training as the client, right? So we're talking about the client right now. Why do I need specialized training to get back to sport? I personally didn't have an injury. I just haven't played competitively in like 10 years. Why do I need a special kind of workout instead of just like a lot of softball to get me back into the groove?
Because traditional strength training to me doesn't usually encompass things that are happening that involve greater velocity.
Well, I'm not even talking about the strength training, right? I mean, that's true. But what I'm talking about is to the small brain that I have sometimes, right? Like the small brain I have about some things, like, oh yeah, that guy needs that. I don't need that. Of course I need that. Is I'll just have a bunch of catches. I'll just start playing softball. I'll just go to the batting cage. I'll just get in softball shape, quote unquote, by playing softball in practice with a friend for a few weeks before the season starts. Why doesn't that work?
I think it would have worked if you had been consistently exposing yourself to like similar demands and your capacity was close.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, again, going back to like, well, I used to be able to do that, right? Like you go back, like I played high school baseball, and so I wouldn't throw all winter, and then I would come in spring, and spring would come, and I was throwing, and my arm would be sore for a little bit, and then I would get in baseball shape, and I was ready to go. But during a lot of the off season and things, I was still exposing myself to forces that were similar, vectors that were similar, and so that margin that I had to make up was much smaller. Right. So I could afford to do that. Based on what most people are exposed to, that seems to not be the truth. And
how much of that has to do with you were in high school? I was in high school, as compared to I was exposing myself to the forces.
Like in terms of like you just believe you're better at recovery?
I mean, like a high schooler gets hit by a car and they end up with a scratch on their knee.
Is that a throw me because I got hit by a car once?
I didn't know you get hit by a car. You get hit by a
Oh
car?
yeah. Yeah.
How
Sorry.
hard?
Very hard. Small
Okay.
truck. Small truck. Not a car. Small truck.
Damn. And were
Yeah.
you in the hospital from it?
Emergency room for about 5 hours and then home.
Yeah. So there's a perfect example. How old are you now?
30.
Okay, so you're still not even there. I'm going to be 40 in November. I don't even know that I'm there, and I hope I'm never there. But if I got hit by a truck now, as compared to if I got hit by a truck when I was 30 or when I was 20, it is different. I'm like, ow. Now, or before I was like, oh man, this is annoying. You were in the emergency room for 5 hours, get hit by a small truck.
Fair. So I guess going back to your question of like, is it because you were in high school or because you weren't frequently exposing yourself to the forces realistically?
Or
I
both.
think it's a combination of both. Like there is a merit of argument where you just don't recover as well because of the stresses and things that your tissues are, changing over time. But I also think that as we age, when you are younger, you're typically doing things that are a little bit more rambunctious and playing and doing those things, and over time you gradually lose that. So I think it's a combination of both things where yes, your tissues are a little bit slower to recover, but at the same time you're not actively pursuing those things outside of like regular life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I relate to what you're saying. I remember I ran track in the fall. I either wrestled or played basketball in the winter, depending on what year it was. And then I played baseball in the spring and summer. And I would stop playing baseball and throwing between the months of October or maybe November and April. Right? And then you start throwing again, and I'm like, oh man, first day, not exactly topping off the radar gun.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel so good.
Yeah.
And why did I throw that ball 8 feet over the catcher's head?
That's the worst part, honestly.
Dialing the accuracy back in. Yeah. Talk to anybody who warms up with me. They'll agree with you. But so are you saying that if forget about if you're saying that because it doesn't matter. We are talking about returning to sport. The course that you developed is about returning to sport. So how long would you say somebody has to be away from sport before the way that they return to it needs to be specifically tailored?
I don't know that I have like a for sure timetable. The thing that comes up for me is looking at a little bit of volumes. And so I would say if I don't have a month, 2 months away, I want to do at least some level of like return to sport, whether that's testing to make sure that the tissues are ready, or some sort of preparatory work. So I would say anywhere, like if I had an athlete or an individual that had been away from a sport for 2 months, I want to make sure that they're ready. I want to test them before I say, yeah, go ahead. Because again, I think the common thing is like, yeah, I feel really good. I just kind of want to see where I was. It's like very famous last words.
Yeah.
Then like, yeah, I feel great. And then you go throw hard and you're like, okay, it doesn't feel so good anymore. I thought I was ready. But
Dude, after warm-ups yesterday, I said something I've never said before in my life. I went over to the shortstop because I was playing left field. I went over to the shortstop and I said, hey, if I need to make a throw, do me a favor, come a little bit out deeper on your cutoff.
yeah,
bring
your relay a little closer.
I used to be the guy who was like, if you catch the ball that I throw at your face, I'll kill you.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to dive down to the ground. It's getting where it needs to go. And you just got in the way. You slowed it down. Now I'm like,
the cutoff.
Yeah, I'm like, if you could come out a little further, that's not where I want to be. So the stuff that you were just talking about, you would reassess to make sure someone is ready to play. Is that stuff in the specialist course that you developed for ALP?
Yeah, so we talk about like deceleration competency to make sure that the arm is ready to decelerate a lot of force, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at throwing, it's obviously one of the highest producing forces that you can put through your system. terms of trying to throw like a softball or a baseball or football in terms of rotational force. And so we have some tests and some things that we use to validate their ability to decelerate and maintain like those types of forces to just make sure the tissues are ready to dissipate them as best as possible.
What I find so interesting about that is I didn't actually think about it until the moment you just said it. The soreness that I get in my shoulders on the backside of my shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And those are not the muscles that are being used to accelerate the arm. They're the muscles being used to decelerate the arm.
Yeah.
And when
they're trying to keep the arm attached to the body.
Yeah.
Realistically.
And when I'm done playing, I'm like, damn, my arm's a little bit sore and it's in the back. And it always was.
Yeah.
Even when I was a kid, when I would get arm soreness, it was always in the back. That's so wild that you would think I would. I never correlated that with being a deceleration thing. Walk us through that. Why does that happen?
So just because the arm is going to be rapidly accelerating through, right? And if you think about throwing an object, your arm realistically becomes the whip that your trunk, legs, and like body create. And so as the arm is rotating through space and we're coming into this internal rotation position, that's happening via transfer of force, right? So now to stop that rotation, to stop my arm from continually spinning, I have to decelerate that arm as it comes through space. Mm-hmm. Slow it down, right? And so that's how that works to me.
And why do those muscles break down so much? I don't want to say more readily, but why do they break down so frequently? Like, why is deceleration such a hard thing?
Because it has a large degree of eccentric load to it, right? It has because of the way that those are lengthening.
Talk to me like I'm a third grader.
Because when the muscles are trying to slow down the arm, they're getting pulled really hard over and over and over again at a really, really high rate. Mm-hmm. And so the capacity that tissue now has and the likelihood that we exceed it becomes greater because of the demand that I'm putting on it.
I see. And so what kind of things would you do? Let's just say for a thrower, because for the people listening to this, I want to be clear. The course that you developed that ALP graduates are able to take on Return to Sport is not specific to throwing athletes. I imagine there's some stuff in there about throwing athletes, but it's not specific to them. When you're talking about the deceleration and the lengthening, why is that a harder thing to develop capacity for potentially than the accelerating part? Like when I think about throwing, I'm like, oh wow, the front of my shoulder is going to get messed up if I throw really hard. But it's not, it's the back. Why?
Because why is that harder to develop? Like deceleratory competency? Is that what we're asking?
Yeah,
I understand your question.
Yeah, I guess so. So the question, because you already answered the first question, which is why does it get hurt? And the answer is because it's moving so fast. So the follow-up question to that is, it's the brakes. The follow-up question is, I guess, what do I do? What would somebody do to prepare themselves for those deceleration loads?
So there's an aspect of velocity that I have to incorporate into my training that has a relative amount of deceleration into it, right? So you look at some people who are using like weighted balls and things of that nature to generate more speed. We can use weighted balls in the opposite way to work on having a higher capacity to decelerate in my training, right? So if I'm going to go out and I'm going to throw, 100 times in a game, right? If I take a weighted ball that weighs more than the ball I'm going to throw, then I can create a bigger cup realistically for my body to dump some of that load into by training at a higher load. I also look at like greater endurance. I look at ability as well to decelerate other forces potentially through other aspects of my body, right? Like sometimes I feel like a lot of our throwers focus on like posterior shoulder, when the posterior shoulder might have enough tolerance and competency actually, when we actually just don't dissipate well through the rest of my body. I don't allow any of those forces to dissipate anywhere else. So there's a myriad of ways you could train it depending on what we identified the low-hanging fruit to be.
So for the person listening to this who right now is, let's just say that they're a coach in a group fitness gym, and somebody just walked in and signed up today, and they haven't worked out in Lord knows how long. How does Return to Sport relate to what they need to know for the client who just joined their gym? Or does it not?
It does, because I think the return to sport principles can be applied across a myriad of things,
Can be or should
right?
be.
I think it should be, right? One of the big things that I think a lot about again is when I understand somebody's end goal of where they want to be, the process of reverse engineering makes a lot of sense. So I want to look at all the things that that person wants to be able to do, the various facets that are going to go into that, and if any of those things involve speed or power, then I need to have a way in which I can assess that. I need to have a way in which I can progress it. I need to have a way in which I can find an entry point and then build them towards that thing.
So what would you say to the person then who makes the argument that people who are using assessments before they start working out with clients are just charlatans who want to find things that you're inefficient or deficient at so that they can point out that you have a problem so that they can obviate that they're the solution so that you will buy from them? And that's the only merit of those tests.
That likely they don't understand their clients as well as they should, or like their actual goals.
Somebody sent me a post today that said that. And I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but it said that. And they asked, what do you think? I said, I think this person is unconsciously incompetent. They don't know what they don't know. And so they're either, so they're sharing information from what they believe to be best. And it's only because they're lacking information. It's not because they're a bad person. But what happens is if you ask them one question, it all falls apart. You ask them, for example, you have somebody in your gym who just signed up and they don't know that they have a bony abnormality in their knee that restricts their ability to squat to depth. They've never needed to squat to depth. They're not a member of your gym yet. They're only going to find out through training with you that they don't have that range of motion. Are they better off, A, just trying to squat clean, see what happens, or B, having you passively take their knee through range of motion and identify how much of it has? And if they answer A, then they're too dumb to train with. And if they answer B, they negated their first argument.
Right.
So, good.
That just reminds me, like I had a friend growing up who was a collegiate catcher, one of my best friends, and had a PCL repair, an ACL, and a medial meniscus repair. And we were in the gym talking. It was like right when I was starting physical therapy school. And we were talking about his knee just feeling like it's going to literally explode every time he's doing a squat. Mm-hmm. But he's in the gym with his strength and conditioning coach who's just like yelling in his face to squat lower. And he's like, I physically cannot because his knee actually doesn't have requisite range of motion. But they're like, you just need to squat deeper. And he's like, no, like I can't. And so again, like to your point of if you don't assess, then you're guessing this person has something and it might work out in your favor some of the time. Mm-hmm. But it would be more effective if you knew that was like, I don't see how it's not valuable to understand that this is how this moves. And so therefore I feel extremely confident being able to go this way and having tons of trust from my client doing that rather than being like, ooh, yeah, my bad. I probably should have checked that, but I didn't. And so now I have to try to earn your trust on purpose after I just blew up your knee having you do a squat clean.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that there is some merit to the argument, and I'll share where I think it is, because I always think it's valuable to be able to, speaking of straw mans earlier, steel man both sides of a position. And I think that the steel man of the movement assessments aren't valuable is some of them are shit. And some of them are too complicated to do anything with. And some of them don't give information that's relevant to what the client is trying to do. And so if somebody came to me, for example, and they were like, I want to be able to sprint faster, and I start measuring the range of motion of their wrist, I'm probably doing something that's extraneous and unnecessary. If somebody comes to me and they say, I want to be able to do everything in the CrossFit gym, and I use an overhead squat as a movement evaluation or a supine straight leg raise, so I'm measuring active hip flexion in a supine position, which I'm never going to use, and I'm measuring the skill of an overhead squat. Yeah, those are things that if I see them in a training session, I'm just going to provide the appropriate cueing to improve anyway, those aren't telling me anything relevant to how I'm going to train the person. So they are a waste. And that's why, to me, when the person who is saying movement screens are irrelevant and they're just for charlatans to sell you things, what immediately comes to my mind is, if I'm going to give this person the benefit of the doubt, they're thinking about movement screens that truly don't tell you anything about the client, that truly don't change the way that you would train them, that will come up in a training session and are extraneous. But they're not understanding the value of merit-based movement screens that indicate only range of motion.
Right. Yeah, because I would agree with you, right? It's the idea of just running someone through something because you have a tool to do it versus like being specific and having context.
Yeah.
Right. Like, cool, I have this thing. Let me throw it at everybody that walks through my door. And it's like, that's not appropriate or something that we need.
Well, and that's a natural thing to do when you learn something new. And I remember when I learned active release techniques for the first time. You ever take that class?
No, but it sounds really uncomfortable.
Well, it is. But I came home and told my wife, I'm like, I can fix you. No thought about like, when does this apply? How does this apply? Just, I'm going to throw this thing at you and it's going to work. And I made her worse. Anyway, back on topic. When you started preparing the Return to Sport course, it was a course that I was excited that we were going to be producing, because a lot of our background as a company is, to say it without ego, is me working with elite athletes, getting exposure for us, and then building demand for more me's that we need. And then now we have a situation where, thank God, everybody on staff is better at doing their job than me. Where like, you don't want me program designing for anybody or coaching anybody one-on-one. I was excited to bring the course out because I think that it's deeply needed. I'm curious what your process for developing the course was, because there's some knowledge that you have in your head, and I imagine you had to go find some other stuff.
So, first of all, like, the reason that a lot of it came to light for me was, as we were mentoring people through the curriculum, as we're moving them through the ALP curriculum, there was a lot of common threads that just continued to come up that were not covered. That had to do with, hey, how do I get somebody back to doing this, right? I have a really good set of tools, but then like to do a lot of things, but what if they want to do X? What if they want to get back? How do I navigate somebody back to running as soon as after we've done a lot of work together? Like, how do I start? Where does that go? And so that's where that kind of started for me. I did have to go get a lot of information, and just from experience and consuming consistent, like, knowledge and things that are put out in the sphere of people that I know, like, and trust, and going through and going through their sources and finding the information and referring back to some of my old, like, biomechanics textbooks and some of my old information that I studied a while back to bring it back.
Why did that stuff add value? Because I imagine that without going through that stuff, you could have helped just about any athlete who had a surgery, went through rehab, and said, Kalin, I want to get back to playing, name your favorite sport. I imagine you could have helped them do that without going back to all those textbooks. Even the guy who's like, I'm going to play 40 and over softball, and I haven't played softball in 10 years. How do I get back into softball shape? I imagine you wouldn't have needed to go read the textbooks. So why did you have to go read the textbooks to write the course?
Because I wanted to be able to understand it and have it at a level where it was, like you mentioned earlier, like, speak to me like I'm a 6-year-old, right? Like, I have concepts, and just from my exposure, that in my brain make sense to me, but I wanted to make sure that I had a good enough understanding to be able to explain it in a myriad of ways to make it applicable to a number of people who don't have my background, who don't have my experience, and to make it really digestible.
What is the most interesting thing that you learned going through that process?
In terms of, like, specific to the content, or in terms of
what'd you learn? Like, it doesn't have to be specific to the content. It could be what you learned about yourself. It could be what you learned about the content. It could be what you learned about collaborating. It could be what you learned about how hard it is to write a course and edit it and all that, anything.
So that's a great question. I think the thing I learned is how imperative it is for me to have a team that are working through it with me that have a bunch of skills that I don't have.
Like
right.
what?
Like
Like what skills?
I'm gonna shout out Laura, right, who's on our staff, who is insanely organized and really great at interpreting what I write and being able to check me on it and ask questions, say, hey, I don't understand this, so that I could go back and rewrite it.
Right.
So that was really, really valuable to me, and not something I would have been able to do if I would have just written about myself.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you were surrounded by a team of people who collaborated to bring this thing to life. Who else is on the team besides Laura?
So we have Natana, Mary, Sam.
Hold on, let's slow it down a little bit. We had Laura, whose job was to take everything that you were writing, make sure it was organized and codified and curated, and then to ensure that everything that you wrote was easily interpreted, because she doesn't have natural or trained expertise in the area that you were teaching. So she was able to say, if I don't get it, they won't get it. Make it easy for me to understand.
Exactly.
That's Laura's job. Who else is on the team?
So we had Dr. Lance and Dr. Ryan.
Okay. What was their job?
Dr. Lance has written a lot of coursework for us in the past, so he was really, really helpful for me in organizing my skeleton and making sure that the flow of the course made sense and was like logistically sound.
So Lance basically helped you build the outline for what it was going to look like when it was done before you started.
Yes.
Okay. And Ryan?
Yeah. Ryan is an incredibly gifted clinician, individual when it comes to running. And so he was my big resource for a lot of the running content. We have a section in there that we call navigating the return to run.
Okay.
And so when I was writing that and putting it together, he was really, really valuable in creating content that was easily remembered, like for recall. I feel like he does an incredible good job of that, of like the 5 C's of this, the 7 S's of whatever, right? Like he's incredibly gifted at coming up with those things that make the content just really easy to recall, so that they can go down and be like, all right, I know there were 7 S's in our running gait analysis. What I've got 6 of them. What's my 7th one?
And then
it just makes it.
And then you had Sam, who was going to be next. What did she do?
Mm-hmm. Sam was a lot of logistics on the back end in our like software, right? To make sure that it gets uploaded into the correct places, make sure all of the assignments end up in the right places on the back end, as well as keeping us on track in the scheduling, like just having everything set up. I would say her and Mary both on that end of like in our board of like, this is when things are done. This is when they need to be done by. If you go through, like make sure you're checking those off to just make sure that we're moving the course along in the timeline.
Okay. So far now we have Sam, Mary, Ryan, Lance, Laura, Kalin. That's 7 if I'm correct. Let's see.
Yeah.
Is that 7 so far? Ryan, Lance, Mary, Sam. Did I miss one?
Laura,
and you. So we're at 6 right now, yeah?
Yeah.
And then you said Natana. What did she do?
Natana was a great like springboard for me, and is now helping us like as we're going through, as the staff is going through the course to vet it and make sure that it's really, really solid. She's helping us run calls to make sure that everybody's on the same page, everybody understands the information, and that we don't need to make adjustments or change things.
Okay. So that's 7 people. And then is there anybody else who directly collaborated with you?
I feel bad. Chris Shallow was a big help for me in terms of just being a resource of when I was putting things out there of like, hey, does this make sense? Mm-hmm. So again, like a big soundboard for me. I really respect his programming skills and his ability to be very, very effective. And so was a big resource for me in helping to understand. He also is going back through his own rehab right now. And so a lot of the stuff was directly applicable to him and like what's going to be coming out. So,
okay. So 8 people directly collaborated to build this course. And it was your job to be the point guard, essentially, the quarterback, whatever you want to call it. I want
shortstop's more up my alley, but
shortstop, fine. The reason I wanted to go through that is I want people to understand the level of depth and thoroughness that goes into the education and mentorship that we develop. This could have been much cheaper to build and much easier for us from a content load to say, Kalin, don't worry about all that stuff, man. Like, this stuff, just write out what you know how to do, and it'll be good enough to teach people. why do you think, why do you think it's necessary that we go as deep as we did? Or do you not?
No, I think it's incredibly valuable because I think individuals have blind spots. And like, again, when I'm writing things out, when I'm putting things on paper, when I'm doing things, it makes sense to me, but I need to ensure that it makes sense to everybody else. And I think if we don't do that, we leave things up for interpretation and chance. We would rather not do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, the next thing you said is the team is now going through it and taking it. How many staff members are now going through the courses if they were students?
So we have all of the mentorship team that are going through it. The grading team has access to it, and the entire RX division has access to it. Like, they're all going through it. So I don't know how many people counting is not my strength. So
counting is not your strength. Perfect. So when you're in the course and you see the rep schemes, just know, Laura edited that.
Yes, hard. It's like, okay, this isn't math, and I'm like, that's fine. Well, just fix it.
Yeah. So here's, oh man, I'm glad that we're having this conversation because part of my responsibility is the marketing of the brand, and I'm seeing so much that we are missing. So much. I wish we were all in the same place. Let me start there, because then what happens is we document the process of building out a course, and people are like, damn, 8 people built it, and now another 9 are going through it to make sure that it makes sense to them. Like, who does that? Who in the digital education space is putting that much time, that much money, that much energy, and that much intention behind the courses that they're developing when the people who are taking them wouldn't know if something in it was wrong in the first place? Nobody.
Especially to me, in a world where, like, you could go to ChatGPT and say, write this thing, go to Canva, build out a graphic, and then just like publish it, and people would buy it, and it would be fun. Like, again, like in a world where it's so easy to do the opposite, I think it's really cool that we don't.
Well, I do too. And I was speaking to somebody yesterday who they sell, this person they were talking about sells a leadership course for $40,000. $40,000. The content is all like this one guy writes it, and then there are group calls every week for like a year. That's $40,000. You're effectively paying $800 per call and getting the information for free, or because I'm sure that stuff's on the Instagram page too. You just got to curate it yourself. That's wild to me. The immediate question I asked is, are we undercharging? And the answer was no, because when you're working with a CEO of a company that does $10 to $20 million a year, and they can take a $40,000 course that advances their company by several hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars a year, that value is there. When you're working with an individual coach who would love to be able to get to $200,000 a year, charging them $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, while you might be able to get it, doesn't feel responsible.
Right.
But anyway, I'm thrilled that we put that much effort into it, and I want to come up with a way to document it better.
Well, we'll be working, I'm sure, on more courses that are going to come out, so we will have opportunity, I'm sure, to do that.
We have opportunity to go back in right now, just to basically simple stuff. Like, we could make a carousel that has pictures of all of the people who participated in the development of the course, what they did in regards to the development of the course, the order of operations of how we built the course, the time that it took to develop it, the number of books that are referenced, the number of studies that are referenced in the course. Because we, if I'm not mistaken, we're now keeping close track of citations. Is that true?
Yeah. It's just, everything that I put in there has a citation if it wasn't out of my brain.
Right. So what I'm getting at is we can and should be celebrating that. And I'm thinking of all the different ways that we can start to create that material. And I think that it will manifest and it'll be really cool. Why is something like this, do you think, a specialty that comes after ALP instead of something that we just offer to the general public to buy? Because I think we could probably make more money just offering this to the general public, but we don't. Why?
There are foundational things that I think need to have understanding of prior to doing this that would, in order for you to adequately wield like the knowledge you would get, right? Like there are principles that are referenced, there are things that are discussed that allow it to build off of that. If you didn't have context, you wouldn't be able to wield the weapon that you would get very well. Like you might be able to do some damage, but not be as precise.
What's an example of that?
So we use a lot of force capacity testing and use that as a reference to say, look, if your individual lacks the ability to generate force within their system and you're trying to make them generate force really fast, but they don't have the capacity to do that because your strength balance says that they're off, that's a much lower hanging fruit for you to go after, as opposed to trying to do the sexy thing over here that is plyometric introduction and lots of deceleration and those things, right? So there's just a really, really, really solid foundation of education and understanding different aspects of the journey with working with a client that come from the ALP curriculum that Return to Sport just builds really, really well off of.
Another marketing idea that just came to mind is sending it out to a bunch of high-level collegiate or professional strength and conditioning coaches who I know to be like, hey, would you give this thing a look over and share a review with us?
Yeah.
And if they're not good, I just won't. I'll end my relationship. Just kidding.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. What would you like people to know about you, the Return to Sport specialty, whatever it is, so that they can, when they're giving consideration as to, is it worth it for me to go through 13 months of ALP just to get to the ability to enroll in the Return to Sport specialty? They will have a piece of information in their mind that will allow them to qualify or disqualify themselves as somebody who should do it.
So, I mean, it's a good question, and I think the support and rate at which you will grow by going through ALP and having the community behind you, our team behind you, and a one-on-one designated mentor to ensure that you're able to adequately implement and use the things that you learned prior to getting to sport really is what's going to allow you to be successful to execute on that thing in the long run. You could try to do it on your own and likely struggle your way through it, but you'd be exponentially more prepared.
Well, so that's a reason to do it. I hear you there. A reason to do it is you're going to have a team behind you who understand what you're trying to accomplish, or a step ahead of you, a step behind you. So a step ahead to drag you forward, a step behind to ask you questions that make you valuable to somebody else, that inspire you to stay valuable so that you can help other people, and a team of experts who were a part of the production of this thing, who can provide very, very detailed insight into the specific information that you're asking about. Sure, that's why you should do it. What do they need to know about it to help them decide maybe I shouldn't do it?
If you're not inspired to help people who want to get back to things that involve greater velocities and things that involve, and you don't want that level of understanding, then you shouldn't do it, right? If that's not the client that you're inspired to work with, and that's not the client that you're inspired to help, or you are not interested, like that's where I would go.
So would you say someone with a CSCS, for example, do you have a CSCS?
No, did the course, didn't take the test.
Got it. You figured that your doctorate was enough. I got you.
Yeah. Well, I went to grad school instead of taking the CSCS.
You're one of those.
Yeah.
Is this course valuable to them, or is everything in it covered in their CSCS?
No, I definitely think it's valuable to a CSCS, mostly because I interact with a lot of people who have CSCS, that when I look at the things that we implement in here, they're done at a much different scale. I feel like the CSCS is a great tool for a lot of performance metrics, but it doesn't catch that earlier aspect, right? It's like I have an athlete who wants to go top end, but they don't know how to establish the bottom, like to even get requisite to do the top end.
What
So
I hear you. What about a physical therapist who has already gone to physical therapy school and wants to work with athletes?
100%, you would need this course.
Do you?
Go ahead.
No, you go. You go. You were gonna say something.
I'm like, so I'm in the clinic right now, right? I still work in the clinic part-time. I work in a sports medicine clinic. And we get students a lot, right? Like we get only students that are on the tail end of graduating, that are about to graduate and go out into the field. And the overwhelming majority is not prepared to serve that type of client. They're just not, because as you graduate from physical therapy school, like you become a very good generalist. And if you don't have a sports med rotation or a sports med, even if you have a sports med rotation and not with somewhere that is kind of on that far end, then they're not adequately equipped, right? Like when I left PT school, the vast majority of my classmates and other people that I encountered, I just don't think they would be ready for something like that.
And what about the personal trainer in the commercial gym who's working with people on their aesthetics?
I don't think you need it. I think it's a fun tool to have, but I don't think you need it, right? If your goal is to get somebody jacked and sweaty, and that's like your only goal is to get somebody jacked and sweaty, there's plenty of ways to do that.
Weight loss coaches?
Similar, right? I don't know that becomes the vein in which you need, not the lowest hanging fruit.
Right. What about somebody who coaches group class?
That one's tough for me, because I have a bias, right? Like if that person is coaching group class and doing personal training, then I think they could use it, because I think there are aspects of group class that involve velocities and speeds generally, right? Like I think of people who, again, want to get back to running, want to get back to dynamic activities that they're just not adequately prepared to help with. So, or help people get that back. And so it's just like, cool, just scale, don't run. Like don't do, like, just do this, right?
Yep.
They have a way to work through it, but they don't have a way to get to it. Does that make sense?
Sure it does. I'm glad that I wasn't hoping for any answer in particular. But what's really interesting is as we were going through the people, I started to get a little bit concerned is the wrong word, but I was inquisitive internally. Is he going to say yes to everybody? Is there an inherent bias that he built the course, he wants everyone to do it? And what's interesting is I also thought aesthetic training doesn't need it. Weight loss coach depends on how they want the person to lose the weight. If that person's going to do a marathon or something, then yes. If they're not, then no. And then the group class, I was also stuck because I'm like, I don't know. I feel like somebody in the gym should have it. Somebody in the gym should have ALP and this, because you're getting people who haven't done this kind of intense training for a long time. And if they go from nothing to significant load in terms of reps, volume, frequency, that's where injury happens. And this is just as much about managing load in terms of returning to hyperactivity. And by hyperactivity, I don't mean stirring in your seat. I mean a high level of activity, as it is about being able to throw a ball again. So I'm torn on that one too. Is there anything go ahead.
No, I would agree with you there that it's like, that's where I was stuck. I'm like, would it be valuable to have, yes, in terms of understanding things that just we couldn't cover in ALP, that become really, really valuable in that situation.
Kalin, Ashby, anything I didn't ask you that you think the audience needs to hear?
No, I mean, I was going to make a Yankees or Red Sox joke, but that's fine.
You can do whatever you want.
No.
If I were still into watching sports, I'd be a Mets fan.
Yeah.
But
I'm sorry, I'd be sad for you.
I very much appreciate that. I am a Mets, Jets, Islanders, Knicks guy. My parents, it's almost like they played a practical joke on me. We love you. And so we're going to fuck up your life when it comes to watching sports. It's going to be terrible.
Yep. It's going to be awful.
Who's your team making a Yankees Red Sox joke?
I'm a Yankees fan. I grew up. I was a huge Derek Jeter fan growing up. Right, like always wanted to be Derek Jeter, the captain, and so could not watch him. So,
all right, Kalin, thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, John. It was blessed. Let's do it again.
All right. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Active Life Podcast. Please remember, give us a hand, rate it, review it wherever you listen to shows. We are on a mission to humanize the healthcare industry by professionalizing the fitness industry to empower the individual to live a life unlimited by the way that their body looks, feels, or performs. If you are inspired by that mission and want to jump on the wagon, find us anywhere. Active Life Professional on Instagram, Active Life RX on Instagram. Come to me personally at Dr. Sean Pastuch. We want to welcome you onto the train. We want you to be a part of the mission. We want to offer you the opportunity to pursue this right alongside us. We're inspired by your effort, and we hope to help you in your journey. Turn pro.